Hello, everybody. This is John Ross, and I'm here to continue exploring our fifth grade South Carolina College and Career Readiness Standards with you. Today, we are going to be specifically focusing in on dividing decimals by powers of 10. And we are going to be targeting Standard 5.NSBT.2, specifically Indicator B. And that standard that indicator read as use whole number exponents to explain patterns in the placement of the decimal point when a decimal is multiplied or divided by a power of 10. And so for our purposes, we are going to be specifically focusing on the division side of that indicator today. And that reality is reflected in our learning objective, which reads as, I can use whole number exponents to explain patterns in the placement of the decimal point when a decimal is divided by a power of 10. So we are going to aim to be able to explain patterns that appear in the placement or the movement of a decimal point when that decimal is divided by a power of 10. And so on this page, we have three questions, which are very similar to one another. Those three questions include a dividend that is represents in its standard form 563 and 7/10. And we can see that that dividend appears in number 1, number 2, and number 3. These three problems are also similar in the sense that they are being divided by a power of 10, and but they are different in the fact that our exponent differs from problem to problem. And so let's start out by first noting that to determine what 10 to the second power is, we need to rewrite that, or we can anyways, as 10 times 10. And so 10 times 10 equals 100. And so I have 563 and 7/10 divided by 100. And when I do that, there's I can of course divide via long division, or I can note that, hey, my divisor is a power of 10, so what I really need to do is identify how many zeros there are, and there's 2 here. And so that tells me that I need to move my decimal over 1 place to the left and then 2 places to the left. So I'm going to drop that decimal right there in between 5 and 6. I will also cross out that old decimal. So 563 and 7/10 divided by 10 to the second power equals 5 and 637 thousandths. So I can also note here for number 2, 563 and 7/10 divided by 10 to the third power. 10 to the third power can be worked out or written out in its long form, and that is, of course, 10 times 10 times 10. And so when I multiply 10 times 10, I end up getting 100, and when I multiply that 100 by 10, I get 1,000. So that is really like saying 563 and 7/10 divided by 1,000. And again, I can divide that via long division if I so choose. However, I can also note that I've got 1, 2, 3 zeros here, and that tells me that I should move my decimal over 1, 2, and 3 places. And so I drop off that decimal, and I can cross out my old decimal, and I should really put a 0 over here on the left-hand side to indicate that there are no holes here. It is just part of a whole now that we have divided by 10 to the third power. And so my answer for 563 and 7/10 divided by 10 to the third power is 5,637, and that is 10 thousandths. Next, we have 563 and 7/10 divided by 10 to the fourth power. And I can again note that 10 to the fourth power is really the short form of saying 10 times 10, which equals 100, times another 10, which equals 1,000, times another 10, which equals 10,000. And so what that means, of course, is that really when we say 563 and 7/10 divided by 10 to the fourth power, we're really saying divided by 10,000. And so I'm going to now note that I have 1, 2, 3, and 4 zeros here, so that tells me I need to move my decimal over 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I'm going to drop my decimal here. I do have a blank space here that I need to fill in with a placeholder, and that placeholder is going to be 0. And then, as I said before, it's often good practice to put a 0 on the left-hand side of that decimal, so we'll put that over here. So 563 and 7/10 divided by 10 to the fourth power equals, let's see, we've got 5,637 hundred thousandths. And so I showed you one way that we could determine how we can move, or how many places we need to move our decimal over. Another way to determine how many places we need to move our decimal over is to simply look at our exponent here. And so I've got 2 as my exponent here. So that's 10 to the second power. So that tells me I need to move my decimal over 1, 2 places. Here I have 10 to the third power, so that tells me I need to move my decimal over 1, 2, and 3 places. And here I have 10 to the fourth power, so that tells me I need to move my decimal over 1, 2, 3, and 4 places. So the pattern that we can note is that the exponent, when the whole number is 10, the exponent that accompanies that whole number can tell us how many places to the left we should move our decimal point. Another pattern is, of course, if we choose to work out what 10 to the second, 10 to the third, and 10 to the fourth power actually equals, we can then examine that product to determine how many places to the left we should move our decimal as well. So we're going to look at just 3 more problems before we move on into some independent practice. In this case, I always believe in working smart, not hard. So I'm going to note that I've got 10 to the fourth power here, so that can inform me, since I've got 5 and 2/100ths, that informs me that I need to move my decimal over 4 places to the left. And I'm moving it to the left because I am dividing, and when I divide a number by another number, that dividend is actually going to decrease, resulting in our quotient. So I said I need to move that decimal over 4 places, so I'm going to move it over now. That is 1, 2, 3, and 4. I'm going to drop off that decimal, and I need to note that I need to plug in those gaps a placeholder, and that placeholder is always going to be a 0, because 0.0000502 is a whole lot different than 0.502, right? So we need to make sure that we are including those placeholders. And again, like I said on the previous page, it's always good to throw a 0 in front of that decimal if we have no holes. And so 5 and 2/100 divided by 10 to the 4th power is going to give us a quotient that reads as 502, and I need to identify what place value that is. That's the tenths, hundredths, thousandths, 10,000ths, 100,000ths, millionths. So 502 millionths, essentially. Here we have, for number 5, we have 45 and 9/10 divided by 10 to the 2nd power. So again, that exponent can be used to tell me how many times I need to move that decimal over. And so just so that we have enough room, I'm going to rewrite that problem, or at least the dividend, over again. So that's 45 and 9/10 divided by 10 to the 2nd power. And so that tells me I need to move my decimal over 1 and 2 places. Drop it off here, cross out or erase my old decimal, and then I need to plug in a 0 here in front of the decimal so that I am crystal clear that I have no holes. My quotient has no holes. So my quotient for this particular problem is 459 thousandths. And finally, I have 807 and 8/10 divided by 10 to the 3rd power. So again, that's a 3 for my exponent, so that tells me I need to move that decimal over a total of 3 spaces. And sometimes our students get confused and they want to move that decimal 3 places to the right, but we move our decimal to the right when we are multiplying, because when we multiply 2 numbers together, we get a bigger number for our product. When we divide a dividend by a divisor, our quotient is going to be smaller than our dividend. So to make a smaller number, we need to move our decimal to the left. That's 1, 2, and 3. Drop it off. And then I want to erase my original decimal. And I feel like it's good practice to put a 0 in front of that decimal to indicate that we have no holes. And so 807 and 8/10 divided by 10 to the 3rd power gives us a quotient of 8,078. So that's 8,078 10,000ths. And so at this time, friends, I'm going to ask that you please complete the Schoology assignment that has been built so that you can have some practice targeting 5.NSBT.2 and further gaining experience and working towards being able to explain the patterns in the placement or movement of the decimal point when a decimal is divided by a power of 10.